Hello everybody, here we are today talking about the 2015 Stanley Cup Final where the present met the future, and that is between the Chicago Blackhawks and the Tampa Bay Lightning. So before we get into that, please make sure to subscribe if you're new to me or hockey, whatever the case may be. That being said, let's get on into it. So yes, believe it or not, 2015 is creeping up on a decade ago, which seems absolutely insane, and you have a Stanley Cup Final matchup between Chicago and Tampa Bay that I really feel like needs to be recapped for how important it was. And for Chicago, this was a very big deal at the time. They had won Stanley Cup in 2010 and 2013, and if they won a third championship, they would solidify themselves as a modern-day dynasty. Big deal. That would be 3 championships in 6 seasons. Now, they were also looking for redemption. They had lost to the Los Angeles Kings in the Western Conference Final in 7 games the season prior, and LA would go on to win the Stanley Cup Final that year against the New York Rangers in 5 games, if I'm not mistaken. So, you know, a lot of Chicago fans, maybe even the Chicago players themselves, saying if we beat the Kings, we get the championship that season. And we're not only back-to-back champions, but also have a modern-day dynasty solidified. So that had to be creeping up in their mind. They had a pretty good year that season as well. The 2014-15 season, which was part of this season where they made it to the final. 102 points and just a really motivated team. As for Tampa Bay, they were a very interesting side. They had surprisingly made the Eastern Conference Final in 2011 and lost to the Boston Bruins in 7 games. It was a very big deal because Boston would go on to beat the Vancouver Canucks in the Stanley Cup Final. And so for a young Tampa Bay side at the time, you're thinking maybe if we beat Boston, we beat Vancouver, and we get a championship. So after that, they ended up missing the playoffs back-to-back years. And then they would make the playoffs back-to-back seasons. So the season before the 2015 Stanley Cup Final, and then this season going into the final for the playoffs, they made it, had a 108-point year, really motivated, especially after the fact that they ended up being swept by the Montreal Canadiens in the 2014 playoffs. So 2011 Eastern Conference Final, no playoffs for 2 years, get swept by the Habs to go all the way to the Stanley Cup Final. Very weird, but also very fun. And I think I just want to talk about how impressive both of these teams were in their own ways. So looking at Chicago, they had multiple names on this list that you could say, wow, really good players. Looking at Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, Duncan Keith, Marian Hossa, all names that you probably are aware of. They had guys like Richards as well that was on this team. Just multiple players that are very good. They also had a trio of good netminders. Now, for younger fans, maybe this doesn't pop off as much. Corey Crawford, one of the more underrated goalies in recent memory. He had a good year. Scott Darling, while his career was short, and he had a really good stint in Chicago, if I'm not forgetting this or remembering incorrectly. While it didn't go great in Carolina, things went pretty well in Chicago for him. Antti Raanta, a player that is still in the league to this day, that's had some decent runs in that time. Trio right there that you have to be excited about if you were a team hoping to contend for the cup. And it's not just that too. You have awards that were given to these players, whether it was before or during, that were on this roster. Selke, Art Ross, Calder, multiple awards for these guys where you could say we have got some proven talent on this team, of course with 2 championships that backs it up, and just really kind of set the tone for Chicago being that team around this time. Everybody hated the Hawks right around then. A lot of people still do because of how good they were, and it kind of sets up the other side for Tampa Bay on why they were interesting. So for the Bolts, I think a lot of this comes down to age being a big thing here. I'm going to put something on the screen that just talks about guys that were 25 or younger entering this season, which is just an insane list, mind you. So, Steven Stamkos, 24 years old. Tyler Johnson, 24 years old. Nikita Kucherov, 23 years old. Ondrej Palat, 23 years old. Alex Killorn, 25 years old. Victor Hedman, 24 years old. And Jonathan Drouin, 19 years old. And I know, some of those players that I just listed, their careers didn't pan up to the extent that you're hoping for. Tyler Johnson actually led the Lightning in playoff points during their run. And then I know Drouin obviously didn't have things go the way he was hoping for with his career. But I just listed off some very big names right there, and some names that were seen as very promising at that time as well too. And Killorn was the only one that was 25 years old. So the youth was just absolutely insane to look at that roster. And while I will say that Chicago's players, especially guys like Kane and Toews, weren't crazy old by any means at this time, it was just a situation where you had 2 good teams that were viewed as different storylines. The narrative for Chicago was the experienced side that's already been there and done that versus Tampa Bay that was still pretty young. They were younger than the league average age that season, that was hoping to really do something after they'd already made the conference final in recent years. And it was fun. Now, the storm was building in Tampa where these Lightning were hoping to really just go out there and be aggressive. Unfortunately for them, and fortunately for Chicago too, I might add, they weren't able to get the job done, as the Hawks would go on to win in 6 games and clinch their 3rd championship to solidify themselves as a modern-day NHL dynasty. Now, that's not the point of this video. It's not to say, oh, Chicago won, therefore, you know, they are better. It's really just to compare where you had a Hawks side that was really good at this point, meeting a team that was really good for the future. For Chicago, this was kind of the peak of the mountain right here. Yeah, there was 2 good seasons after this, but they haven't made the playoffs at all, except for one time during the whole qualifying round thing where they beat the Oilers in an upset fashion. Since that season, or just in general in recent years, they haven't been a very dominant team. So their peak was right there about when they won that final cup. As for the Lightning, seems like everything just went really well for them. They had 5, if I'm not mistaken, conference final runs in that time, which blows my mind. And they had a President's Trophy as well. So that was great. What makes it even better is 2 championships, and it is just so fun to look back at this and look at all these names of who these guys were and who they played. I didn't even mention Andrei Vasilevsky also played in this Stanley Cup. I don't know how many games he played. I think he replaced an injured Ben Bishop in one of these games, or Ben might have had a bad game. But either way, you're looking at this and saying, wow, I can't believe that this was almost 10 years ago, and there are so many impactful pieces here, and getting to see what transpired before this and then what transpired after this. But anyway, what are your thoughts on this 2015 Stanley Cup Final? Let me know down below in the comments. Also, please make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new. Everybody stay safe. Have a great night. And you go love hockey, alright. Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.